Thank you for joining us today. You have entered today's meeting on mute. Please use the chat function located on the Zoom navigation menu to ask questions to speakers and panelists and to engage in conversation throughout today's meeting. If you have any technical issues, please privately message the host for assistance. Today's webinar will be recorded and available to registrants with the webinar slide deck and resources. At this time, please welcome Ryan Saunders, Deputy Director of State Policy.
Good afternoon, everyone. Some of you may still be coming in. So we will first go over a few quick housekeeping items, and then we'll go over the agenda. So with that, I'm going to advance the slides. There we go. So just as a reminder, kind of norms we've established for a lot of these virtual meetings at this point in terms of the number of virtual meetings you might likely have. Take a break when you need it. We all understand if you need to go off video, those kinds of things. Please hold on, I'm having oops, not moving forward. So also, please take a moment and add your state to your participant name. That way it'll be easier for us to track when we move into small groups. And then we're also going to be recording the main session, but we will not be recording the breakouts. So there will be a video and audio we can share after the meeting that others will have access to, and you'll also be able to kind of distribute if there's conversations you want to have back at home. And we, as always, will be adding everything into our Teacher Licensure Collaborative folder, which goes out after we send out links afterwards in the email, post-event email. So we can move on to the next slide. So first, we want to say a special thanks to our national partners, which this work would not be possible without their contributions, expertise, commitment, so on and so forth. And we are very fortunate to have such great partners in the Teacher Licensure Collaborative work. We'll move to the next slide. See if I can. And we also want to thank the support from the following organizations, foundations, which have also contributed to the success of the Teacher Licensure Collaborative over the past year and a half. Next slide. So today's agenda, we're going to start with welcome and opening framing. We're also going to hear a little bit about some updates on some national work related to registered teaching apprenticeships. We'll then shift to the bulk of our conversation today, which is a panel focused on building teacher preparation pathways that support the whole child. And this will look at grow your own, residencies, and registered teaching apprenticeships. We will then have time, because there are so many states doing this work throughout the Teacher Licensure Collaborative, we wanted to make space in the breakouts to also hear more about other state work and dig into common implementation challenges and other questions that may be coming up for the panelists that we'll get to hear from during the first 40 minutes. And then we'll go to a closing, and then there will be optional state team time, which is our usual. You have the space to use it if multiple members of your state team or from your state agency are present. You're welcome to join that breakout group and have a conversation where you reflect or think through some of the takeaways from this conversation. We'll move to the next slide. So again, welcome to everyone. This is our second meeting of the second year of the Teacher Licensure Collaborative. And these are the states who have participated over the past year and a half in different forms and continue to support this work. A number of states had conflicts or statewide meetings that are happening today, and it is the summer. So we appreciate everyone who is able to join, and also part of why we're recording to make it available to many as possible afterwards. We can go to the next slide. To kind of drive home why the Teacher Licensure Collaborative exists and what brings us together is there is this commitment across the Teacher Licensure Collaborative states to building whole child systems that reflect our growing knowledge of learning and teaching. And this particular group focused on building systems of licensure and preparation program approval that are kind of aligned and build off the most up-to-date science of learning and development research, and support whole child systems. And this is about a desire to learn from others and build on our common work, which we know when working with states, just the need to hear what other states are doing, how are they approaching this problem, in particular over the past several years, how so many of the challenges related to licensure preparation in states have been some common challenges that we've seen. And we also have momentum to change the field. In the Teacher Licensure Collaborative's first year, we saw a number of these types of efforts. With the Teacher Licensure Collaborative, states come with their own focus, their own priorities, and we work to support them and build opportunities to learn from each other. And these are a lot of the areas where states were focusing over the past year and a half. Obviously, tackling pressing teacher shortages continues to be a significant challenge across almost every state. Continuing to build connections and break down silos, which is not easy across state agencies and across stakeholders and partners, supporting shifts in preparation practice, and revising guidance and standards for teaching practice and for preparation program approval that align with science, learning, development, and support this whole child vision. We can go to the next slide. So starting back at the beginning of this year, we have a few kind of markers of progress where our second year is gone. We had our March 29th TLC full collaborative meeting, a virtual meeting, where we started with a focus on the priorities around how states are able to measure progress on updated standards, revised standards that reflect this growing body of research, and how states are able to measure preparation practice, measure their own progress policy-wise, measure different pathways and progress they've seen. And we heard from research in California on their CTC survey for program completers and employers. And we also heard from Tennessee, who is working on a preparation program survey for completers that kind of reflects a broader vision for what preparation programs would hope would be actionable information from those surveys. We also kicked off our standards working group in April, which is a group, a subgroup of the TLC with participants from across different states and our national partners that are working to collect and elevate and synthesize a lot of the progress and policy models that are happening in the TLC and find a way to incorporate that into a product and also come up with ways where that work can continue to inform TLC states over time and be kind of a resource kind of coming out of this work moving forward. And we also want to celebrate our partners over at NASDAQ, who put on a wonderful annual conference in Phoenix back in June. And a number of our TLC states were there representing their work, sharing a lot of great work happening in their states. And we were able to support work happening or conversations in Minnesota and Oregon, sharing their work. And the Standards Working Group also met in person in Phoenix, and which was a great chance to kind of move that work forward. So all of that brings us to today, which is kind of shifting our conversation to thinking about pathways that support both rigorous and comprehensive teacher preparation, but that are of increasing interest to states as they continue to wrestle with the challenges of meeting kind of teacher vacancies and shortages across their states and districts. There's continued interest in building pathways that are clinically rich experiences, integrated coursework, but also paid and compensated with financial incentives. And so the question we're trying to wrestle with today is how can high quality preparation pathways support teaching practice that is aligned with the science of learning and development, and starting with the conversation around residencies, grow your own programs, and registered apprenticeships, which are of particular interest these days, to get below those terms and think a little bit more about what are the qualities of those pathways that are most supportive of teaching practice that supports the whole child, so on and so forth. And so that's what brings us to today and our conversation as we continue this work, moving from not necessarily just revising standards to support teaching practice, but thinking about the preparation experiences that will do that. And so that brings us to today. We'll go to the next slide. Some of this work grows out of an ongoing conversation in what's called the Educator Preparation Laboratory. That's an initiative with the Learning Policy Institute and the Bank Street College of Education, and a number of leading edge teacher preparation programs across the country that have continued to work and build models of different pathways that are deeply connected to the research and the science, learning, and development. And out of the Ed Prep Lab, there have been, you can go to the next slide here, what are the design principles for educator preparation. And a lot of what we're talking about today when we think about the policy that we'll be digging into at the state level. It's about policies that support this type of educator preparation, regardless of the pathway, and how these pathways that we're talking about, these emerging pathways of grow your own apprenticeships and residencies, can support these features and be deeply integrated in these design principles or reflective of these design principles, while also meeting the kind of pressing policy moment and need that clearly have brought them into being. We can go to the next slide. And for a moment, I want to also highlight how there continue to be ongoing conversations at the national level, whether it's most recently, there was a definition for teacher residency supported by the Pathways Alliance that was released earlier this year. And the Pathways Alliance is also working on national guideline standards for registered teacher apprenticeships. And I wanted to invite Jackie King from AACTE, one of the chairs of the working group that has produced these national guideline standards, to join us for a quick update, because this work has deep implications for a lot of our standards work, but also just broadly the field as a whole. And so, Jackie, thank you for being willing to join us. I want to hand it over to you for a brief full update. And Jackie, I think you're muted.
All right, there we go. Can you hear me now, Ryan?
Yeah, perfect.
Well, thank you for inviting me today, and I just want to acknowledge that Ryan has not mentioned that the Pathways Alliance is co-led by Innovate EDU and LPI, and Tara Kinney, who is on the call, is LPI's point person, as I understand it, on the Pathways Network, and has certainly been a leader. She's been a member of the working group and a leader in the development of these guideline standards. So I'm going to lean into you, Tara. If there's something important that I haven't mentioned, please jump in and bring it up. As Ryan described, this was a work group that was convened under the umbrella of the Pathways Alliance, which brings together a wide variety of national, state, and local organizations that are concerned with educator preparation. And it really builds on the work that the Pathways Alliance had previously done to come up with a national definition of teacher residencies. And so it's interesting in the registered apprenticeship program. You would think with a term like national guideline standards, there'd only be one, but actually the Department of Labor will produce multiple guideline standards for a single occupation. So if you were to dig into the deep recesses of the Department of Labor's website right now, you would probably find things called national guideline standards for registered apprenticeships in teaching. However, most those documents were created by small groups of folks or by single organizations. I think we're the only group where we've really brought together a wide array of organizations. I see that the National Board is represented on this call, and they were on the working group. So there really was a broad cross-section of the educator preparation landscape that was part of the working group. And we started meeting last fall and worked through numerous iterations of these draft standards, submitted them to the Department of Labor in late March, and very pleased to say that unless something untoward occurs in the next week or so, we should have these standards published by the Department of Labor by the end of July. So please stay tuned for that. Pathways is taking charge of really trying to promote these standards, get them into everybody's hands, make sure people know they exist, help to explicate them. They are written according to a format that the Department of Labor prescribes and that every occupation has to use. So I think it's fair to say if any of us had sat down with a blank sheet of paper to write national guideline standards for apprenticeships, they probably wouldn't look like this document, because it really is, according to the format and requirements of the Department of Labor. So Pathways is taking charge of really trying to help to kind of unpack it and explicate it for people and sort of direct people to the elements that are most important as you think about designing an apprenticeship program. We'll be doing a lot of similar work at AACTE and participating with our partners in Pathways. We'll do a webinar this fall. There'll be a lot of materials out to help people kind of wrap their minds around these guideline standards. I think I don't think there's a lot in it that will surprise you, but we really did try to put some markers down for quality and for what's important about a quality apprenticeship experience for the apprentices, for the mentor teachers, and most importantly, for the students that these apprentices will be interacting with. So we're very clear in the standards that apprentices may not be the teacher of record. We suggest a mentor to apprentice ratio of 2 to 1 at most, or 1 to 1, of course, would be fine. We state that if an apprentice doesn't already have a bachelor's degree, they should earn one as a result of the apprenticeship program. Consistent with all registered apprenticeships, it needs to be a year in length. It needs to be paid at a rate that is aligned with initially what paraprofessionals make and then what starting teachers make. So I don't think, if you're familiar with apprenticeships at all and with apprenticeships and teaching, I don't think you'll find a huge amount in it that you'll find really surprising. We did use the in-task standards as to sort of define the competencies that apprentices need to demonstrate, but we did that as a model, and in recognition of the fact that states may have their own standards of teacher competencies, which could be substituted for the in-task standards. But since those are national and represent a consensus in the field, that's what we used. So a little bit of a preview of coming attractions of these standards. We hope that they'll be useful guidance to folks, and also will be helpful in your state if there are any who want to say, well, couldn't we do this faster? Couldn't we do this? Did they really have to earn a bachelor's degree? Couldn't they be teacher of record? Couldn't they be substitute teachers 5 days a week? If any of those kinds of conversations come up in your state, we hope that this document will also be helpful as kind of a marker of some standards that we think these apprenticeships need to adhere to in order to provide, really quality preparation that will set these teachers up for long-term success.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And I just want to let everyone know as a reminder that all of these national guideline standards and all the accompanying documents will go live, hopefully next week. And we will make sure to send out a full email kind of with everything that's being distributed to the TLC, just in case you don't see it in your other listservs. But I also wanted to quickly bring Tara Kinney on from LPI, just to kind of quickly add additional context before we shift to our panel.
I think Jackie did an amazing job of giving the rundown on it. I guess I wanted, for folks who may not be as familiar with national guideline standards, it was a new term to me. I'm still gaining the lexicon around apprenticeships and the vocabulary of the U.S. Department of Labor. But I think of them, and Jackie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's essentially a template that's pre-approved by the Department of Labor that states or districts or other sponsoring entities for apprenticeships into teaching could pick up and use and adapt for your purposes to your state or local context. They're not standards you have to stick by. They're a template essentially for you to adapt to your context. And that was like a piece of the terminology that took me a little while to process. So I just wanted to share that with the group. And I just want to give a shout out to a few of the members of the working group or organizations that were part of it, NEA and AFT, who are part of the Teacher Licensure Collaborative. We're part of the Pathways Alliance working group that developed these national guideline standards, and CCSSO came and shared their prior work to support states in developing apprenticeships into teaching that really informed this process. So just want to thank all of those groups for their work to get to this place.
Thank you very much, both Jackie and Tara. And again, we are fortunate to have such a kind of collaboration at the national level, kind of setting this kind of marker as this work takes shape, because it is happening at such a rapid clip in so many states. And so we will make sure to share as much as we can as that all goes live next week. And it all speaks to, again, this moment where we are hearing so much about apprenticeships, but also we continue to hear about residencies and grow your own. And there are a lot of overlaps and a lot of connections from this work to what the TLC has been working over the past year and a half. And so we want to shift now to the panel discussion. We will hear more about state level work on this front and let you all know that we will have a panel discussion. You're going to hear from 3 states doing this work, plus Jonathan Moore, Chief Strategy Officer at the Council of Chief State School Officers. And then we're going to shift to a Q&A. And then there will be a chance for small group conversations. So any questions you do have, there will be chances to get them answered, and you can put them in the chat as well in case you don't want to forget them. But without further ado, I want to hand it over to our friend Jonathan Moore from the Council of Chief State School Officers and thank him for joining this conversation.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for having me, and welcome to all of our attendees. We have 5 tremendous speakers who I am privileged to introduce before we continue our panel conversation. First, we have Dr. Ellen Bernstein, who serves as the president of the Albuquerque Teachers Federation. During her 14th year as an elementary school teacher, Ellen achieved national board certification, an accomplishment she credits to her union activism. She has served as the president of the Albuquerque Teachers Federation for the past 22 years. Ellen is also active in the American Federation of Teachers and serves as the vice chair of the AFT's Teacher Program and Policy Council. Joining us, we also have Dr. Yelena Bailey, Executive Director for the Minnesota Professional Educator Licensing and Standards Board. Dr. Bailey is Executive Director of Minnesota's Professional Educator Licensing and Standards Board, the agency responsible for overseeing teacher licensure, ethics, renewal, policy, and teacher preparation in the state of Minnesota. We also are joined by Dr. Susan Bowe, Licensure Pathways Policy and Academic Program Specialist at the Oregon Teacher Standards and Practice Commission. Susan has been a teacher at the secondary level, a director, and a faculty member. In her work at the Oregon Teacher Standards and Practices Commission, she's been tasked with facilitating the Oregon Teacher Apprenticeship Model in collaboration with their state apprenticeship agency. We're also joined by Tyler Livingston, who's a supervisor of educator workforce programs for the Minnesota Department of Education. A middle school language arts teacher for 13 years, Tyler now leads the agency's work on teacher development and evaluation programs. For the past 10 years, Tyler has worked on multiple state initiatives to help educators be their best selves for kids and to recruit, diversify, support, and retain the educator workforce. And last but certainly not least, we're joined by Reed Wessels, the teacher residency coordinator for the New Mexico Department of Education. Prior to helping to support teacher residencies in New Mexico, Reed spent 15 years as a teacher and administrator in New Mexico public schools. Please join me in giving a virtual round of applause to all of our panelists. Before I turn it over to our panelists, I want to provide a little bit of context. As we engage in our conversation, we know that there are key elements of preparation aligned to research when it comes to the clinical experience. We know that clinically rich preparation experiences include integrated coursework that supports and reinforces knowledge, skills, and dispositions that actually reflect the science of learning and development. We know that these experiences also include trained, mentor, and cooperating teachers who are also seasoned and have a track record of success themselves. We also know that financial supports to increase access to these types of preparation experiences are crucial. We saw a number of states during and post-pandemic devoting funds toward support of improving teacher pathways. For example, in the state I most recently came from, Nevada, Nevada contributed approximately $20 million to support teacher residencies through stipends for teachers engaged in student teaching. And that's just one example of several that a number of states have leveraged in order to advance and promote teacher pathways, which you'll hear about shortly. We want to offer a look at these different models and how states are working toward these with the broader goal of supporting a stable and well-prepared teaching profession. And so without further ado, we will start to take a look at what Minnesota has undertaken to build a state-level infrastructure to support Grow Your Own programs, work that was given a financial boost during their most recent legislative session. I will now turn it over to our friends from Minnesota.
Thank you. I believe I'm starting. I had to join on my phone, so my apologies to everybody. I can't quite see you all, but I'm going to be brief before turning it over to my colleague, Tyler. But just for some background, Minnesota separates out our education system slightly differently. So everything kind of teacher related is in our board, and then everything we say district and student related is an MDE, but it's of course more complicated than that. So we partner quite a bit, and Tyler's going to speak to that with the Grow Your Own. So for our board, the Professional Educator Licensing and Standards Board, we set the standards that are used in the Grow Your Own program. And we just finished a 4-year project, update our teacher licensure standards. We are the first in the nation to use some pretty controversial words in some of that, and including teachers understanding things like white supremacy, understanding history, how identity impacts students, a lot of social emotional learning built in. And so our role is in then partnering with MDE and how they implement that through the Grow Your Own, so that teachers who are coming out of our classroom spaces, who are educators in other ways, have that same training. So I'm going to turn it over to Tyler to kind of speak to the connections there.
Thank you, Elena. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Tyler Livingston, Minnesota Department of Education. And yeah, PELSB and MDE are sibling agencies working to support educators. We unite really under a vision where we want to see a future where every single student in the state benefits from an educator workforce that is effective, that is adequately trained and supported, as well as a racially and ethnically diverse educator workforce. We know how much an impact that teachers of color and American Indian teachers can have on students. And we know to do that, we need to do a number of things. We need to increase the workforce, diversify the workforce, retain the educators we have, and really crucially, create both in our teacher preparation experiences as well as our working experiences in pre-K through 12, culturally responsive and inclusive environments so that educators stay. We do have a history and several generations of Grow Your Own in Minnesota, dating back to at least 8 years, possibly a few more. We really started with a $1.5 million investment, particularly with our 2 urban centers, Minneapolis and St. Paul, working with University of St. Thomas and the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus on a model that was a post-baccalaureate teacher residency program. That was kind of the only allowable Grow Your Own pathway that initial investment made. We saw a great deal of results, and that model expanded after a few years to be utilized statewide and not be strictly restricted within a residency model program. So approaches supporting paraprofessionals to get their bachelor's degree as well as license, or as well as master's degree and license and things like that. That statewide expansion increased the investment from 1.5 million to 6.5 million. We had some 30 million in applications for that 6.5 million. So there was some level of appetite demonstrating a need for this. So in the 2023 session, the investment from the state increased to 25 million annually. And it now allows even more programs, including 2+2 pathways and things of that sort. So while Elena mentioned, yes, the standards for teacher licensure have now been updated, the Grow Your Own funding, which by the way is explicitly focused on teachers of color and Indigenous teachers, grantees must use 80% of those dollars for BIPOC teacher candidates. And our most recent session has added other Grow Your Own inspired funding streams, including one focused on our early childhood educator workforce, focused on our special educators, as well as an investment in teacher residency programs. So we have lots to share. We've learned a lot of lessons and have a long ways to go to make the system cohesive and comprehensive.
Thank you both, Tyler and Yelena. There were a couple of things that resonated with me that I'd like to expand upon if you could. You mentioned at the beginning of your conversation around the desire to advance both racial diversity as well as providing financial incentives for different Grow Your Own programs. Can you, from your perspective, offer any advice to states who are looking to advance racial diversity? Specifically, what programs or policies should they be considering as they look to advance that part of the work?
One idea is the explicitness and the focus of the program. So we have this financial investment, and it is in the state law that 80% of the dollars must go to candidates of color and Indigenous candidates. So there's no wiggle room around that level of explicitity. Or explicitness, and of course, and Dr. Bailey could probably comment as well in how the standards of practice have changed that conversation as well.
I'll just add that I think two other key things. I think I want to reiterate Tyler's comment that one thing I think our state is doing well that I'd encourage other states is to put these things explicitly in your laws or your rule if you can. So we also define teacher shortage based off of the gap between the student demographics and our teacher demographics. So as long as we don't have a racially diverse teacher workforce, we're going to have a shortage, right? And particularly a shortage in that way. And so funding to deal with the teacher shortage can be directed towards that. The other piece is because our teacher standards, which define our profession in the state, are so much based around issues of equity and diversity, then it really reframes the way we look at teacher qualifications and expertise to really honor the experience and the uniqueness of what teachers of color bring and Indigenous teachers bring to the classroom. So I think that helps with recruiting and hiring and things like that as well.
And as a quick snapshot, one more thing, that gap between our student demographics and our teacher demographics is right now about 37% of our students are students of color, and around 6 to 7%. Oh, my light decided to turn on. 6 to 7% of our teachers identify as teachers of color, and that might be, or at least in recent years when we've looked at other states, a nation-leading gap, which is not the way we want to be leading.
Absolutely. So I'm hearing two key themes based on all of the tremendous work you've shared, and that's intentionality about not only the pathway, but advancing the diversity of the pathway, and then being very explicit about how you want to accomplish that. And it sounds like Minnesota has done just that. Thank you both for sharing in this part of our panel. I now want to turn to registered teaching apprenticeships and hear about the work happening in Oregon. With so much momentum behind registered apprenticeships, we wanted to focus on a state that was working out a process that was deeply connected to their broader push to incorporate the science of learning and development into preparation for new teachers. So now we'll turn it over to Dr. Susan Bowe. Susan, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and I'm Susan Bowe from Teacher Standards and Practices Commission in Oregon. And the unit that I'm involved with is called Program Approval of TSPC, which helps support our educator prep programs to maintaining the standards for teacher preparation. And in Oregon, all of our teacher preparation programs are in institutes of higher education. So we do not have any alternate routes to teacher education. So part of the role of program approval at TSPC, especially in the last 2 years, has been to develop social emotional learning standards that our EPPs must integrate. Cultural competency practices, those standards are being placed in our administrative rules as we speak. So program approval must include those standards. So as we look to different pathways, I was appreciating Tyler and Elena referring to Grow Your Own. Oregon does have a Grow Your Own model, but we have now used the Grow Your Own model to extend it into the registered apprenticeship model. Still leveraging the high educator prep standards that we have in rural, and then supporting our educator prep programs, pushing them along, how about that? And being open and welcome to the registered apprenticeship. So we are excited about that. I really appreciate what Jackie said regarding what she learned doing these standards at the national level, because we have had to work with our Bureau of Labor and Industries, our registered apprenticeship division there, and it seems very similar to the process that Jackie and her team went through at the national level. Very steep learning curve, and it's been much more complex than I had anticipated when I took this job 2 years ago. So I was a bit surprised.
I can certainly imagine. And thank you, Susan. I do have a follow-up. So given the work that you're doing, particularly, how does the work of the commission that you're leading connect to broader priorities around social emotional learning and cultural responsiveness? Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
So on our team and also involved with LPI has been Kristen Rush, who is our social emotional learning expert on our program approval unit. She's been working with Ryan and Julie on the standards for SEL, as well as full child learning. And then placing those standards in our Oregon administrative rules can somewhat be a little bit challenging, because our educator prep programs already feel that they have a lot of standards to meet. And so now we are layering more important work on them, but also supporting them in that work by giving them resources. We have regular meetings. We have a library for them to refer to. So we're really trying to support our educator prep programs and not just making a requirement that they must do on their own. And so that's what we're really working at. And I appreciated also what Ryan had on his slide about the collaboration and breaking down silos of partners. And that is what Oregon is really working towards, the partnership in our work with all of our education agencies.
Thank you, Susan. I think one of the themes I've constructed from the many great things that you shared about your work is the idea of how we define support or think about support, right? In addition to the resources it sounds like you're providing, but the opportunities to actually bring folks together or to actually connect to folks, I think is really important and something certainly worth highlighting as a foundational tenet of the work you're leading. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Finally, we'd like to put some focus on state work happening outside the TLC, but it's relevant to this conversation and work that has been accelerating over the past several years. New Mexico's push to expand access to teacher residencies has been notable for the partnerships that have sustained this effort and the commitment to invest over time in financial supports for new residents. And so at this time, I'm going to turn our attention to Ellen and Reed to walk us through their work.
Hi, everybody. Ellen Bernstein, Albuquerque Teachers Federation. I'm going to start with some background, and then I'll have Reed from the Public Education Department talk about, how it's really going. So a little history about how this developed. We have a legislative education study committee here in New Mexico, where in the interim between sessions, senators and representatives get together, and there's an actual agency that helps them take a deep dive into different educational topics. throughout the interim so that they can craft legislation and share ideas. And in 2017, I think right after Linda's book came out, give it a plug, Empowered Educators, she was doing a presentation to the LESC because they were taking a deep dive in the publication that was created by the National Council of State Legislators. I can't remember, it was a real skinny little book. Anyway, they took a deep dive and Linda talked about this whole continuum of support and what people do in all the other nations, from pre-service through advanced professional development to attract, retain, and prepare well the teachers that they need for their country's children. So shortly thereafterwards, we kept that conversation going, and I pushed as an advocate that pushes on policy and what we can do for public education and educators. I started pushing on this idea that alternative licensure doesn't mean that it has to be substandard. It doesn't have to be quick, and it has to be alternative, which means supporting well-prepared teachers. And residency is one way to do that. Well, it just so happened there was a teacher who we supported to get elected into the state legislature who agreed to carry a bill to look at a pilot for teacher residencies. And simultaneous to that work, the Albuquerque Public School District, in a triad partnership, the teachers union, the school district, and the local teacher prep university, were all working under a grant from NCSL, no, from NCTR, sorry, wrong initials, from the National Collaborative of Teacher Residencies. Did I get that right? Anyway, we had been developing a residency here in the Albuquerque Public Schools. And interestingly, one of the things that we had the hardest time with in Albuquerque in terms of our teachers was attracting people into special ed. And the local university had basically, you know, maybe a handful of people studying to be special education teachers. When we used our residency model and established a special ed partnership focused specifically on that, people flocked into it. So our shortage area, I think, had a lot to do with whether we were supporting and training well people in some of our highest needs areas. So we got that bill passed, and that bill was passed in 2020, and it had a little bit of seed money in it for people to start. And then during the next year or so, the deans and directors and all of the different superintendents started talking about the promise of these residency programs. So we went back to the bill sponsor and said, would you sponsor a bigger bill based on your pilot one, but really flesh out everything it takes to have a residency program? And we want it to be a paid residency program. So our beginning salaries at that point in time for licensed teachers was $50,000. So we established a paid residency at $35,000. We also put in there the funding that it would take to have a coordinator, somebody who works with the school district and the local university, how to support and compensate co-teachers so that they learn how to kind of meta-teach, how to really talk about what they're doing, not just have somebody, you know, pretend that they know what they're doing because they mimic the actions of the co-teacher, but really unpacking the pedagogy. And we got this bill funded in the 2022 session. And residencies, Reed will tell you, they've just they've multiplied. And what we have found, I think, and what we're going to find as we move forward is that the residents that we attract, number one, they're more diverse, they're better prepared, and you don't just need to attract people, you need to retain people, and well-prepared teachers are more likely to stay in the profession. And the whole residency bill is based on this full year embedded in the school culture with a gradual release of responsibility and theory and practice connected. And I think it's a very rich model, and I'll let Reed talk about how we've moved on since then.
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you everybody for an opportunity to really share the exciting work that's going on with New Mexico teacher residencies. I would say just preface this a little bit with just some additional background information. In 2018, the state of New Mexico and the Martinez-Yagi consolidated lawsuit was found to have failed to meet its duty to provide a sufficient education for at-risk students. And this was namely Native American students, students with disabilities, economically disadvantaged students, and English learners. And so as a response to this ruling, the New Mexico Public Education Department, in collaboration with a task force of educational leaders, created the New Mexico Public Education Comprehensive Plan. And part of this was really to promote high quality research-based teacher residency programs as a part of quality teacher preparation, recruitment, and retention. Ellen had mentioned legislatively the financial supports to teacher residency, and in 2022, the New Mexico legislature allocated $20 million to support teacher residency and paid student teaching. That funding has also been is reoccurring for the next fiscal year. And so what this has really allowed us to support through the Public Education Department here in New Mexico is a robust co-teaching model, which recognizes and acknowledges teacher residents. And this is through 8 institutions of higher education, their educational prep programs. Each teacher resident receives a $35,000 stipend. Within that, they are calendared the beginning of the district year with the school district that they're embedded in. In addition to that, there are financial incentives and supports for the mentor teacher. There's a $2,000 stipend for the mentor teacher, stipends for the district administrators that are supporting the work. And so really the work in and of itself that we're doing is to really support the institutions of higher education through community of practice to really make sure that we're acknowledging legislatively the components that make up a robust teacher residency program, which is really based on national standards for teacher residency. So explicitly things like teacher residents can't be teachers of record, really working to define supports for residents of limiting things like substitute teaching in the classroom, but really providing that clinically rich components. And so that's really the fully immersive year-long experience of the partnering school district is really a big part of the community of practice. So we're really involving at a district level superintendents, principals, and the residents themselves to really develop a framework that supports the goals of residency, which are really to increase the number of residency prepared teachers in this year-long clinical experience, representation of diverse groups that are represented within that Martinez-Yagi lawsuit, and then really reduction of barriers to becoming a teacher in New Mexico through the residency program. One of the most exciting components connected to this that we're working on now is, and it just went live as of July 1, is a teacher residency license. And so what this really does within the state of New Mexico is it allows a lot of an opportunity for the districts to create hiring agreements for the residents to potentially provide them health benefits and health insurance, which that came directly from communities of practice within the field. But also really recognizing a role of teacher residents within the school district itself. And so I think more than anything, just the stories and the storytelling and speaking with the residents and the mentor teachers of the results of this through those stories that we're hearing from the residents and the students that have both a resident teacher and a co-teacher have been really powerful. And it's really leading a movement that is an educator at heart. You really feel a consensus of momentum amongst all the stakeholders to really support this work moving forward. And we look forward to expanding of the teacher residency and really learning from from the past year to really work towards sustainability. And so that's really sort of the next component of the work that we're doing is really looking at the sustainability model to make sure that this is something that continues to be a viable a way to strengthen the educational ecosystem in the state.
Thank you. I will say one of the themes that resonated with me as you all were talking was the idea of collaboration to help advance and accelerate your work. And so I just want to spend a moment there. If I'm a state and I'm looking to either enter this work or perhaps to accelerate, can you talk about New Mexico's approach to collaboration? What did that look like, and how did you cultivate these relationships to yield such positive benefits, if you will?
Absolutely. I think it was certainly and continues to be like a work in progress. I think one of the real benefits to this work is just the financial support for the residents. And the funding through that $35,000 stipend does flow through the 8 institutions that have approved ed prep programs through the PPSC, which is the Professional Practices and Standards Committee through the state of New Mexico. And so there was a real concerted effort to work with national partners. Prepared to Teach was one of the really those partners to really help to bring together deans, directors, educational leaders. And so we really started there to work really with a consensus of reviewing and looking at House Bill 13 and the specific components that made up the teacher residency, and really building a collaborative effort, realizing that New Mexico is a very diverse state. And so you have teacher residents in districts where there may be 160 students, and then you have teacher residents in school districts that have 73,000 students and everything in between. You have rural and urban districts as well, all which have very unique needs within their communities. And so really bringing together and recognizing that, and then ultimately expanding that conversation in the community of practice to include district and school personnel really helped, and just really being mindful and aware to take risks within this work and to really listen to the communities and listen to the needs within those communities.
And then I want to add something that Reed had mentioned earlier, and that is the power of the story. We have a long history in the Albuquerque Public Schools of having a partnership between the College of Education at the University of New Mexico, the school district, and the teachers union. And it's unique that the practitioners are at the table talking about the need to have well-prepared teachers and what that looks like when you talk about teaching based on the science of learning, not based on this idea of coverage and compliance to some kind of textbook or program. I mean, those are the voices that the practitioners bring. And the idea that one of the things we learned over time is you really have to interview those co-teachers and make sure that you have a role model that perpetuates what we need in teaching, which is the deep teaching and the deep learning, not just the coverage. And so that richness and that narrative from all the different points of view, because the professors, they have an incredible amount of knowledge, and they understand how to make it fit within a university structure so people have the right credits to graduate. And then the school district, they know the kind of employee that they want to hire, and they want to make sure that they retain in their district. And those kinds of narratives that went from just a small partnership throughout the state in a fairly small amount of time, because there was such success, and we were able to tell the stories of the residency model success. It spread through, like Reed said, we have a lot of very small rural districts that will say, well, that model works in Albuquerque, but you're a big district. What about the rest of us? And we're able to have those relationships and talk about how it would work in a much smaller district with one university serving many, many districts. So the power of story is my point.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ellen and Reed. And thank you to all our panelists. And to help us keep this conversation going, we're going to open it up to Q&A. From there, we'll have some additional time to get further into details when we transition in about 5 minutes or so to small group conversations. So don't worry, if you don't get your questions answered here during Q&A, you will certainly have a chance to speak further with the presenters in the breakouts. And so to go to our first question, it's for anyone who wishes to answer, but perhaps we can start with you, Susan, from Oregon. Can you speak a bit more about how you've engaged with preparation programs to help them build a new pathway, whether it's apprenticeships, residencies, grow your own, and sort of walk us through the steps you've taken to share ownership of that?
Sure, that is a great question. In Oregon, and I used to have an EPP hat on, so I can speak a little bit about how they were feeling when we started to navigate into this territory, because they were feeling challenged and feeling like there might be some competition if they could not rise to the occasion to provide a pathway that was flexible enough for an apprentice or grow your own candidate. So we formed a consortium of education partners in Oregon a year and a half ago. And we asked for EPP deans or directors or chairs, anyone who could support the work to be a part of this consortium. And we received interest from private EPPs and public. So we made sure we had both represented on the panel consortium, and that those individuals also were on the consortium with school district representatives, classified staff, union representatives, superintendents. So we had 11 education agencies meet twice a month for the last year to talk about what this would look like. Because we can't get into the work, at least we couldn't in Oregon, without fleshing out a lot of the questions and having a very transparent conversation about what does this mean for EPPs? Like, what's our role? We are the owners of the curriculum. So how are we to be involved in this? And are you going to take some of our students from us? So it was quite a challenging process. But as long as their voice was recognized as being very important and we listened to their concerns, we encouraged them, all the educator prep providers, to begin to change their modality of how they present their coursework. Because, as you all know, a resident or an apprentice who's working cannot sit in a classroom from noon to 3 in the afternoon necessarily at an EPP under the traditional model. And so we were encouraging them to branch out, and not just evenings and weekends, because what does that do for a working adult? Oh my goodness, so busy. It's just shifting the weight to different hours of the day. So they get off of an 8-hour work and then they go to class. So that was a bit of a paradigm shift in the traditional EPP world. So it's interesting, and I'll just stop with this, that there are 2 educator prep programs in Oregon that have gone to a hybrid model, and one is completely online. And of our pilot apprenticeships, they have all chosen those 2 programs. They have not chosen the traditional educator prep programs to be partnered with because it doesn't work. So those educator prep programs have come to me and said, what are we to do? Are we out? Said, no, you're not out. Let us help you change. Let us help you innovate. Let us help you find capacity. How can we support you? So it has been challenging in Oregon, and there are still some EPPs that are not supportive of this work, but we're moving ahead anyway. Because as Ellen says, the stories, it's about the stories.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. I think for the next question, if we could turn to our panelists from New Mexico, you talked a lot about the push over time to get funding for residencies. Can you speak a bit more to the lessons on how to move the needle with regard to growing financial supports and incentives? What should states be thinking about in terms of financially supporting these pathways over time?
I'll go ahead and start reading and see what you have to say. The teacher shortage is an incredible motivator for all of the partners. I think the fact that it's hard, you all know the statistics on the dwindling numbers of people entering teacher preparation programs, and what's happening to colleges of ed. We all know what's happening in our schools when we don't have the number of licensed people that our students need and deserve, especially in certain areas of teaching. And so those numbers make a very compelling case for high quality, well-supported teacher preparation. And one of the parts of the bill is an exchange of promise. We promise to give you a really well-supported year where you make a livable, I'll put that in quotes, livable stipend, so you don't have to work 2 jobs, and you don't have to work weekends and evenings to support your teacher prep habit. But then in exchange, we want you to commit to working in the school district that partners with the higher ed institution for 2 to 3 years, depending on the program. And that's written into the bill. And so what you have is all these statistics about the need, and Reed mentioned this lawsuit that's looming over our heads in New Mexico, saying you don't have the teachers you need for the kids you have. And so all of that creates a compelling narrative that we need we're completely state funded here in public education. So we need to do this legislatively. And when you do it legislatively, the great thing is there's a law on the books that says, here's something that we've committed to. And then the stories keep you got to keep telling the story about how many graduates you're getting, how diverse they are, and how long they're staying, so that the lawmakers say, this is what my community needs. And then they have the political will to keep the funding going.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing, Ellen. I know for the sake of time, our participants are itching to get more from you. And so we want to make sure we pivot to that opportunity for our breakouts. So I'm going to pause us here. I'm going to hand it over to Ryan. Once again, let's give a virtual round of applause to our panelists. You will hear from them in just a moment, but thank you, Ryan.
And thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, panelists. I want to flag when we do shift in a moment to small groups, we're going to be breaking into groups that are labeled residency, grow your own, and apprenticeship. And I just want to be upfront. It's very clear, and just hearing how each of the panelists have talked about this work, there's a lot of overlap in how this work proceeds in states. So when you think about which group you want to join, because you will have that option, we're hoping to have a balance in terms of numbers of people in these different conversations, but know that you're not limited to what you can talk about if you join one of the breakouts and have a question that's related to one of the other models or pathways that we've been discussing. And I also want to encourage you to ask further questions of the panelists that are going to be joining your conversations. This is kind of an opportunity to dig further if there's something that came up in what they were describing. And I know even though everyone got to share a lot about their work, there's still plenty that they could share. So can we jump to the next slide? So again, as a reminder, you'll have the chance to go down. There will be a breakout room button, and you can find the breakout room, and you'll actually see them getting populated. As I've said last time, thank you again thank you as you kind of make your choices and find a way to balance the numbers. And we have these different questions, which are again meant to generate discussion, get you all talking about your different work. And finding ways to find common ground and common implementation challenges. And we will populate this into the chat. We can go to the next slide. And in just a moment, we will have the chance to choose those groups. And here are what those groups look like. There's a room, three rooms, one for teacher residencies, and we'll invite our friends from New Mexico for someone to join that group for further questions, grow your own, and registered apprenticeships. Are there any questions about moving into small groups? All right, well,
Yikes.
everyone, I want to apologize to my group. I was so invested in the conversation that I completely lost track of time and had to do that thing where we had like 5 seconds. So thank you for the residency group for understanding, and we can have additional opportunities to talk through some of those details. I just want to, as we're pulling up the slides, just to kind of give you a quick little, here are some next steps. I want to thank you all for engaging in the small group conversations, to our panelists for participating in that conversation and sharing your work. We are deeply appreciative of the willingness to come and share that work, particularly as we're all trying to work on it. I don't think anyone's perfected these pathways yet, so it's great to continue to hear how that process is evolving, because I know it's of value to everyone here. So again, I just thank you all. It's been amazing. We are going to continue with some check-ins. I have a mistake here. Those check-ins are not going to be in the past. They're going to be in the future. So that would not be April and May. Those would likely be more of an August, September thing. We will work with you all to set those up. We have an upcoming standards working group virtual meeting, August 23rd, and the wider TLC will hear more about those updates from that group as we get further along in that work. And we have our October 18th TLC full collaborative meeting, the next version of this conversation, where we will talk in more depth about engaging preparation programs in this process of changing practice, which is both relevant to this conversation, relevant to the one in March 29th, and just relevant to this overall work. Without further ado, yes. Yes. And Robert, please jump in. And Robert has a great plug on an event and a proposal opportunity as well. Robert, come on, if you want to jump in here.
Certainly. Good afternoon, Brian, and thank you. I hope you can hear me. I wanted to give a little plug. In January, a collaboration through NASDAQ and the National Center for Grow Your Own, we will be hosting a registered apprenticeship event, 1 day and a half event, January 25th and 26th in San Antonio, Texas. The call for proposal is out. So if you go either to the Grow Your Own website, the National Center for Grow Your Own, through David Donaldson, or through NASDAQ, you would see the call for proposal. So I encourage all states. We are going to have different strands of those who are just thinking about it, halfway through it, or knee deep into this registered apprenticeship. And we're hoping to have great sessions, a lot of participant interactions, very collaborative, and sort of hands-on. So if you have a chance to register when the registration becomes available this fall, but particularly if you want to submit a proposal, I encourage you and your colleagues to submit a proposal and participate, because I think it's going to be a wonderful event. Thanks, Ryan.
And thank you, Tara, for forwarding that link. And thank you, Robert, for sharing that. We encourage you all to, if you have time, to put it together a proposal. If we at the TLC could be of help at anything with that in terms of just helping you get those together, because I know that can take a lot of work. And thank you all again. If any questions or suggestions, if you have further conversations you'd like to have based off of these conversations in the small groups or any of the panelists, we can set up smaller conversations to talk in depth on any residency, grow your own, or apprenticeship policy, or any other questions that come up with related to the research in this ongoing work. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Julie or myself. And I hope you all have a wonderful, we're going to transition into state team time if you are looking to use that time. But for those of you who are going to be exiting, we're greatly appreciative of you joining this conversation and contributing. And we'll have about a 5-minute break, and then you can move into state team time.